A small fragment of papyrus, believed to have been lost for centuries. A few dozen words written in a long-dead language. Hailed as a lost gospel, its message caused a sensation around the world.
It has a message that could shake up Christianity.
It suggests that Jesus Christ had a wife.
This new fragment that we found, the Gospel of Jesus' wife, actually has Jesus saying, "My wife."
Hello everyone, it's Mark Goodacre here. Welcome to the NT Pod, the podcast all about the New Testament and Christian origins. It's episode 87, and today I'm asking, what is the Gospel of Jesus' wife? Like lots of places all over the world, Duke has changed to teaching which is remote. They prefer the word remote rather than online. And given that I've often used my podcast in the past when we've had snow or storms and things like that, I thought I would use the podcast as well to reach out to my current class on non-canonical Gospels. I teach a class on non-canonical Gospels at Duke pretty much every year. It's one of my favourite courses to teach. And from time to time, I have actually podcasted while I've been teaching the course. But luckily, I've never actually podcasted anything for where we're getting to in the syllabus at the moment. So the need to speak to the class has opened up the opportunity for some fresh episodes of the NT Pod. So if you're a regular listener wondering why it takes such a long time to get from one episode to the next, and then suddenly we have a whole array of them, that's why. It's because of the coronavirus. So there will be several episodes coming up over the next week or two. And currently my plan is to begin with the topic that we were going to be discussing in class this week, which is the Gospel of Jesus' wife. So before beginning, I just want to say hello to my class, my non-canonical Gospels class, and say I hope you're all staying healthy and well, and that you're able to get to your work in these really trying and difficult circumstances. Now, when I was teaching my non-canonical Gospels course back in 2012, one of those things happened that just occasionally happens when you're teaching, that something that makes the news headlines actually impact directly on your teaching. And back in September 2012, I was teaching non-canonical Gospels, but back on the 18th of September, there was a major announcement. A new papyrus fragment had been found, and this new papyrus fragment had been given the name, the Gospel of Jesus' wife. Now, the announcement was made in Rome at the International Congress of Coptic Studies, and it was made by Karen King, who is a professor at Harvard, not just a professor, the key professor in religious studies up at Harvard. And she made this exciting announcement, and at the same time they cleverly coordinated this with a major media blitz. The New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Smithsonian magazine all published pieces the same day. They'd done interviews with Karen King earlier, but they'd coordinated things so that they all came out the same day. Meanwhile, Harvard released a major website with wonderful high-def images of the fragment, an FAQ, a huge 50-page article by King explaining the relevance of this new manuscript, and it also had a live interview with King. Now, just to get a feel for this, I'm going to play now a clip from that interview with Karen King that appeared on the website that day.
In this 4th century fragment of a book written in the Coptic language, we have a new, previously unknown gospel. 8 lines on the front, 6 lines on the back. The most exciting line in the whole fragment, however, is the sentence, Jesus said to them, to his disciples that is, Jesus said to them, my wife. What this does not mean is that Jesus had a wife. It's not evidence for us historically that Jesus had a wife. It's quite clear evidence, in fact, that some Christians probably in the second half of the 2nd century, that's between about 150 and 200 AD, thought that Jesus had a wife. We have, of course, in the last decades, numerous examples of these kinds of things, where they found Jesus' tomb, where they found James's ossuary. So I was extremely skeptical, and without actually too much trouble, I saw how the sentence is right in front of what's existing. That is to say, what would be in the missing part that fit with the mother was very closely related to a particular saying in the Gospel of Thomas. We spent several hours looking at this fragment, discussing it in every possible way, starting from the notion that it's a forgery, and trying to convince ourselves, trying to make arguments against that. But the conclusion was that it was authentic and probably 4th century.
So that gives you a sense of just how important, how exciting this fragment is. But the question everybody was asking is, where did it come from? What is it? It was shrouded in mystery. Karen King herself talked about a private collector to whom she gave in her article sincerest thanks, but she said that he wished to remain anonymous, and there was really very little more than that. He apparently delivered the fragment to Karen King in December of 2011, so that's several months before the release date in September of 2012. And she did the right thing. She didn't just publish it, or she didn't just put it right out there. She didn't get in touch with the media. She worked hard with her colleagues just to get a feel for what it was that was actually in her hands. And it's worth stressing when I say what's in her hands, it's really small. When you actually look at the thing to scale, it's really not much bigger than a little business card or a cell phone, something like that. But she got together with Roger Bagnall from NYU and Anne-Marie Leyendyke from Princeton, and they worked hard on looking at this, and they wondered, could this thing be a forgery? It seems so sensational, but they became convinced that it was indeed authentic. Now, with the Gospel of Jesus' Wife fragment, there was a letter, a typewritten letter, and it was written by a certain Professor Dr. Peter Monroe, and we know a man by that name. He's no longer living. He was from the Free University in Berlin. Peter Monroe is writing to Laukamp, H.U. Laukamp, someone that we hadn't heard of before, somebody who apparently owned this manuscript, this fragment. And in the letter, Monroe quotes somebody else called Professor Fecht, another person who is no longer living. And he says, Fecht is of the opinion that this could be evidence for a possible marriage. So you have this letter that kind of authenticates the fragment, saying that it appears to be about a marriage of Jesus. The same correspondence also mentions a fragment of Coptic John. Remember that this Gospel of Jesus' Wife is written in Coptic, and it mentions a fragment of the Gospel of John, and it turns out that this was also owned by this anonymous owner who approached Karen King. So what do we make of this extraordinary fragment? Karen King emphasised, and this was really important, because whenever you have a media story like this, the sensation is the order of the day. Karen King emphasised that this doesn't prove that the historical Jesus was married. She said it over and over again. I think she had to say it in every single interview, that just because you have a text, a late text, that says that Jesus was married or implies that he was married, doesn't mean the historical Jesus was married. And she was always trying to claim that very strongly. And of course, the context in which she had to do that is a context where we all know about the Da Vinci Code. We know about Jesus' marriage to Mary Magdalene. So you can see why she had to distance herself from that, and she avoided making that sensationalist claim. What she said was that the fragment witnesses to the fact that there were lots of people who thought Jesus was married at this time. So she felt that it witnessed to a lively debate about Jesus's marital status and sexuality. So she felt that it shed light on what people were talking about, probably in the late 2nd century, because she thought that this was most likely from a work written in the late 2nd century, even though the papyrus fragment itself looked like it was from the 4th century. And one of the things that King emphasised is that there are some parallels here with the Gospel of Philip, where Jesus has a companion, Mary Magdalene. And in fact, Karen King has written about that in other contexts. But this is clearly a really important seeming fragment. And I actually remember my first view of it rather well. I mean, I have been back over my blog. I wrote over 50 blog posts on the Gospel of Jesus' Wife between 2012 and the present day. And going back and reviewing them for this and the next couple of podcasts has been quite revealing. On the 19th of September, I wrote, "I'm not a papyrologist, but I can't get over how amateurish and blotchy this fragment's text. I cannot get over how amateurish and blotchy the fragment's text looks. It's clearly written by someone using a thick, nibbed pen, and it looks weird. Several letters are particularly bold, as if someone has written them over and over again for emphasis, including the tar, which is the my bit in my wife, tar him in my wife." Well, that was all I offered in terms of the anomaly of it. And then I talked a lot about, in the same post, about how excited I was. I love new discoveries. It's terribly exciting. And I also praised Karen King and those that were involved with it for avoiding sensationalism and putting materials out there, because one of the things that we as scholars absolutely love is being able to see really, really good pictures of the thing. And we were actually able to blow up the Gospel of Jesus' wife so we could see it really, really closely. And as it turned out, that was something very, very helpful down the line. Now, the story did move incredibly quickly, and within a week of it having been published in 2012, September the 18th, 2012, within a week, it became clear that there were some serious problems that in fact made it pretty likely that this papyrus fragment simply couldn't be genuine. And I'm going to start exploring that in the next episode of the NT Pod. In the meantime, thanks very much for listening to this latest episode of the NT Pod. It's great to have your company, even though it's in these rather trying and difficult times. You can find me on the web at podacre.blogspot.com, follow me on Twitter at goodacre, or you can find the NT Pod's Facebook page at NT Pod. I'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.